Something significant is happening inside the Cleveland Browns organization, and the local media establishment is not happy about it. Todd Monken and Browns ownership have made a deliberate, calculated decision to restrict access for reporters who spent the entire 2024 season running negative coverage against Shedeur Sanders. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. The doors are closing, the press credentials are being reconsidered, and the media personalities who built segments and articles off a rookie quarterback's struggles are now being held accountable in the most direct way possible, by being shut out entirely. The central question here is not whether this is controversial. Of course it is. The question is whether it is justified. And when you lay out the full picture of what happened to Shedeur Sanders last season, what was said, who said it, and how the coverage was framed, the answer becomes very clear. Todd Monken is not a coach who reacts emotionally. His career history tells you that. He is a builder, someone who studies what environments actually produce elite quarterback play and then constructs those environments deliberately. When he arrived in Cleveland, his mission was specific: develop Shedeur Sanders into a franchise cornerstone. A top 5 pick carries enormous organizational weight, and Monken understood that the investment the Browns made in Sanders required a serious, focused developmental infrastructure around the young quarterback. What Monken found when he arrived, however, was a media environment that had already written Shedeur's story before the player had taken a single meaningful snap at the professional level. That is not hyperbole. The coverage patterns, the tone of the reporting, and the specific narratives being pushed by Cleveland's most prominent NFL journalists were firmly established against Sanders before any on-field evidence existed to support those narratives. Monken watched all of it. He assessed it. And he made his decision accordingly. To understand why ownership and coaching staff have reached this point, you have to understand what the coverage actually looked like throughout last season. This is not about individual opinions or fair criticism. This is about a documented, sustained pattern of coverage that was designed, whether consciously or not, to undermine a young player's reputation before he had the opportunity to establish it himself. Start with the most fundamental problem. Shedeur Sanders, the 5th overall pick in the draft, received 0 first-team reps during the preseason. 0. Not a single snap with the starters. For any professional journalist covering the NFL with genuine knowledge of how quarterback development works, that fact should have generated immediate, pointed questions directed at the organization. Why was the franchise quarterback not being prepared? What does it say about the front office and coaching structure that the player they invested their most valuable draft capital in was being denied the foundational repetitions that every starting quarterback requires? That question was almost never asked. Instead, the camera turned on Shedeur. The coverage framed his lack of preparation as his problem, his deficiency, his failure. The backwards logic of that framing was either invisible to the reporters running it or intentionally ignored. Rex Ryan made that agenda impossible to miss when he lost his composure on live television, screaming that Shedeur was not doing enough. Rex Ryan, ESPN broadcast, 2024, a rookie quarterback. A player who had been given no first-team reps, a kid trying to learn a professional system with none of the tools that system was supposed to provide him. And a man who spent decades in professional football chose not to ask one honest question about organizational preparation but instead chose to publicly humiliate the young player on national television. That moment was a turning point, not in Shedeur's career, but in revealing how deep the media's anti-Sanders agenda actually ran. Tony Grossi took it further. When Shedeur dealt with arm soreness, a completely routine, biologically inevitable consequence of throwing a football thousands of times without proper warm-up and repetition, Grossi turned it into a character assassination. He questioned Shedeur's toughness. He questioned his dedication. He questioned whether the player had any right to feel physical discomfort at all. Every professional quarterback in the history of the sport has dealt with arm soreness. It is physics. It is what happens to the human body under repeated strain. Mocking a young man's physical discomfort while completely ignoring the systemic conditions that caused it is not journalism. It is theater, and it is cruel theater at that. Mary Kay Cabot, the lead Browns reporter and one of the most credentialed voices covering the franchise, ran what can only be described as a months-long campaign suggesting that Shedeur Sanders was undisciplined, narcissistic, and simply the wrong pick for Cleveland. Week after week, she pushed the Dillon Gabriel narrative, suggesting the Browns may have made a mistake, that the kid from Colorado was not built for the NFL, that the organization had gotten it wrong at the most critical position. This went on for months. Before Shedeur had a legitimate opportunity to prove himself, before the organizational conditions existed for him to succeed, the narrative was being constructed and distributed at scale. What made Cabot's coverage particularly damaging was how she handled a speeding ticket, a traffic violation. She took a minor legal incident and built it into a full character profile, presenting it as evidence of an attitude problem, a pattern of behavior, a fundamental flaw in Shedeur Sanders as a person and as a professional. A speeding ticket became a personality diagnosis. That is not accountability journalism. That is narrative construction dressed up as reporting. While all of this was happening around him, Shedeur Sanders responded in a way that revealed exactly the kind of person and competitor he is. He said nothing. He did not go on social media and engage with the criticism. He did not give interviews defending himself against the personal attacks. He did not give the media machine the engagement it was designed to generate. He understood, with a level of maturity that most veterans never develop, that the coverage was performance. It was content production. And feeding it would only amplify it. So he went to work privately and gave them nothing publicly. Every mocking segment, every hit piece, every on-air explosion, he absorbed it and used it internally while refusing to let any of it become his public identity. And when real opportunities on the field finally materialized, he did not just show up. He performed at a level that justified exactly what the Browns believed about him when they made him a top 5 selection. A quarterback who can process that volume of external noise, refuse to be defined by it, and still execute at a high level when given the opportunity is precisely the kind of player you build a franchise around. The mental composition required to do what Shedeur did last season is not a small thing. It is one of the rarest qualities in professional football. The most revealing chapter of this entire story is what happened the moment Shedeur's talent became undeniable on the field. Every media personality who had spent months building content around his supposed failures, limitations, and character flaws made a complete reversal. Suddenly the quarterback they called fragile was a star. Suddenly the player they said was not ready was the future of the franchise. Suddenly the narrative shifted, cleanly and completely, with no acknowledgement of what had been said before. No accountability. No correction of the record. No apology for the personal attacks or the false narratives. Just a pivot, as if the months of sustained negative coverage had simply never happened. The reporters moved on. The platforms moved on. The audiences were expected to move on too. This is precisely why Monken's decision carries such weight. If the media holds itself to zero standard of accountability for what it publishes about players, then the organization must establish the standard for them. And the standard Cleveland is now setting is straightforward: access is earned, not guaranteed by a press credential. Mental environment is not separate from performance, it is performance. A quarterback's confidence, his ability to process the field, his willingness to take risks and trust his reads, all of it exists in a mental space that is directly shaped by the environment surrounding him. When you fill that environment with sustained negativity, manufactured controversy, and public mockery, you are not simply annoying a player. You are directly attacking his ability to execute. Monken understands this at a fundamental level, and his decision to control that environment is not about protecting Shedeur from adversity. It is about eliminating noise that serves no productive purpose. The press access that Cleveland media assumed was their right has always actually been a privilege. Honest coverage, genuine accountability journalism, and treating players as human beings rather than content opportunities, that is what earns access. Spending a season mocking a rookie, twisting a traffic ticket into a character indictment, and running narratives that ignore the organizational failures responsible for a player's struggles, that is what loses it. Critically, this is not solely a coaching staff decision. Browns ownership, including Jimmy Haslam, is aligned with this approach. When ownership and coaching staff are unified in protecting a franchise quarterback, the message that sends goes far beyond one training camp policy. It tells the entire league and every journalist covering it that Cleveland is serious about building something real, and the media circus of last season will not be replicated. Other organizations are watching this. If Shedeur Sanders thrives in a focused, controlled environment and produces on the field, and every indication of his ability suggests he will, other coaches and front offices will recalibrate their own relationship with media access. The terms of that relationship have always been negotiated. Cleveland just changed its position in the negotiation permanently. Shedeur Sanders is at the most important developmental stretch of his professional career. The reps he accumulates now, the chemistry he builds with his offensive line and his receivers, the offensive system he internalizes under Monken's guidance, these are the structural foundations of everything that follows. None of that work benefits from a parallel track where he is spending mental energy responding to reporters who have already decided what his story is going to be. With that noise removed, Shedeur can focus entirely on football. The arm talent that made him a top 5 pick has not diminished. The pocket presence that scouts identified as elite coming out of Colorado has not disappeared. The football IQ that allowed him to process complex defenses at the college level and carry it into the professional game did not evaporate because of a hostile media environment. Those qualities were buried under a sustained campaign of negativity last season. Now the conditions exist for them to resurface. The reporters who built audiences off Shedeur Sanders' struggles are now on the outside. The kid they spent a season trying to define is inside, locked in, working. And when he performs at the level the Cleveland Browns believed he was capable of when they invested that 5th overall pick in him, every segment, every article, and every on-air explosion from last year will look exactly as hollow and agenda-driven as it always was. If you have been following Shedeur Sanders from the beginning, through the draft process, through everything last season threw at him, and now into this new chapter in Cleveland, you already know he deserves coverage that reflects the reality of who he is and what he has handled. If this story matters to you, hit the like button right now and make sure this information reaches every Browns fan and every NFL follower who should be paying attention to what is happening in Cleveland. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because every development in this story, every Shedeur update, every Browns move, every piece the mainstream media won't cover honestly, we will be here covering it. This is only the beginning.